B'siyata Deshmai, we're going to learn Eruvin Daf Kuf. We're going to start from the Mishnah, 4 lines from the bottom of Daf Tzadik Tes Omid Beis. Says the Mishnah, Ilon shahoyo meisach al ha'oretz, a tree whose branches were bending over the ground. Im ein noifei gavoya min ha'oretz shloisha tvachim, if the ends of the branches reach a place which is within 3 tvachim off the ground, metaltalin tachtov, it's as if the area underneath the branches of this tree is entirely enclosed, and one's allowed to carry in there. It's got the status of Roshus HaYochid. Metaltalin tachtov. Another halacha, says the Mishnah, Shroshav gvoyim min ha'oretz. If you have the roots that are protruding above the earth, above the ground, 3 tfachim, gimel tfachim, lo yeshiv alein, we're going to learn at length, one's not allowed to use a tree, you're not allowed to climb up a tree, sit on a tree on Shabbos. And if you have the roots, if they're less than 3 tfachim off the ground, they're not considered as a tree. And it's just considered as if it's a thickened part of the earth, as the ground. Ara smichta, it's just an elevated section of the earth, and you're allowed to sit on it, walk on it, and use it. If it's more than 3 tvachim, or if it's 3 tvachim and more above the ground, then it does not have the status of ground, and therefore it's considered a tree, and you're not allowed to sit on a tree. Lo yesh valein, you're not allowed to sit on those roots that protrude above 3 tvachim off the ground. Says the Gemara, Omer Rav Huna b'Reider Yeshua, Ein metaltalin boy yoisa mi beis hosayin. Even in the event that these trees were originally planted in order to offer a covering, an enclosure, to be able to use for residents, for domestic purposes, nonetheless, you're limited to an area of 5,000 square amis. If the area under the branches of this tree are no more than 5,000 square amis, then indeed one's allowed to carry underneath it. If, however, the area is more than 5,000 square amis, more than Beis Hasayim, one is not allowed to carry there. It loses its status of Roshus HaYochid, it has the status of a Carmelis, and you're not allowed to carry there more than 4 amis. Even though it was Mukaf Ladira, the trees were planted in order to serve this purpose. Asks the Gemara Maitama, why should this be true? We know that any area that's been totally enclosed, and it was enclosed in order to be used for residents, even if it's more than Beis Hasayim, even if it's up to 10 kur, a huge area, one's allowed to carry in the entire area. Says the Gemara, Mishum dehava dira shetashmisha la'avir, the type of residence, it's true that people, the guards, the people who are watching the fields, are going to sit under this tree and be shaded there. However, they're only sitting there not because they need to be under the tree, but because they need to protect the fields beyond the tree, which is outside the tree. It's dira shetashmisha la'avir. It's a type of residence whose use, the main purpose of this residence, is for the avir, is for the airspace outside this enclosure. And any enclosure which was not enclosed for the purpose of the inside of this enclosure, rather it was serving something outside the enclosure, it's restricted to 5,000 square amis. Continues the Gemara, and now we're going to learn at length about using a tree, climbing a tree, sitting on a tree on Shabbos. Says the Gemara, Shroshav gavoyin min ha'oretz v'chulu. We saw in the Mishnah that if the roots of a tree are protruding above the ground 3 tvachim, they are no longer just considered an annex, an extension of the ground. They are considered a tree, and therefore one is not allowed to sit on it or use it on Shabbos. Says the Gemara Itmar, Shroshe ha'ilon haboyin milemalo mishloisha l'toich shloisha. What happens if the roots go up beyond 3 tvachim, higher than 3 tvachim off the ground, and then they curve downwards back into the area within 3 tvachim off the ground? Is one allowed to use the parts of the roots that are now within 3 tvachim off the ground? Is one allowed to use them? Do we say, since it's within 3 tvachim off the ground, therefore you're allowed to sit on them and use them? Or do we say no, since they're an extension of an area of the roots which is above 3 tvachim, and that area one's not allowed to use on Shabbos, one's therefore not allowed to use the entire root on Shabbos? That's going to be a machlokes hamiroim. Rabbi Omar mutalish damish ben. Rabbi says you look at the root that you're trying to sit on. If whatever point of the roots you're trying to sit on are less than 3 tvachim off the ground, it's considered as an extension of the ground, and one's allowed to sit on it on Shabbos. Rav Sheshes Omar, Rav Sheshes argues and says, also l'shtamish ben, you're not allowed to use these roots on Shabbos, even though they are less than 3 tvachim off the ground. And the Gemara explains, Rabba Omar mutar l'shtamish behen de kol pochis megimel da'ara arahi, that anything that's less than 3 tvachim off the ground is considered an extension of the earth itself, and therefore it's not considered a tree, and one's allowed to use it on Shabbos. Rav Sheshes Omar, also l'shtamish ben, the kiven de mikoyach isur ka'osi. Rav Sheshes says, since these roots are an extension of a part of the root which was also to use on Shabbos, namely the part that's above 3 tvachim, asurin, then the entire root that comes from there is also asa, even if they go back down to a point 3 tvachim, less than 3 tvachim off the ground. Says the Gemara, Dedomu kamashunisa. If you have a root which is similar to a mountain peak, that means it's a root that goes up, all the way up above 3 tvachim, and then there's shoots going off it. Some of them are above 3 tvachim, some of them are below 3 tvachim. Some of those shoots shoot out of the root before it even reaches 3 tvachim. Some of the shoots shoot out of the root above 3 tvachim off the ground, but then they hang down within 3 tvachim off the ground. So the halacha is as follows: to salkin le'ela, those roots that are above 3 tvachim asurin. Everybody agrees you're not allowed to use them on Shabbos. To nochsin lesatoyi, those roots which no part of that root was above 3 tvachim. That means the roots that protrude from the main root less than 3 tvachim off the ground, sharu, everybody agrees you're allowed to use them. Litzdodim, but those roots that they protrude from the point above 3 tvachim and they hang down to a place lower than 3 tvachim, pluk to the Rabba Rav Sheshes, that's the machlokes of Rabba and Rav Sheshes we saw before. According to Rav Sheshes, it's going to be asur, since the earlier stage of this branch protruding down starts above 3 tvachim, it's an extension of something which is asa, and therefore you're not allowed to use it on Shabbos. And Rabba says that it's mutar. Rabba says that since at this point the part of the root that you're trying to use is less than 3 tvachim off the ground, you're allowed to use it on Shabbos. Continues the Gemara, v'chein anigra. If you have a tree that's got quite a wide trunk, and it's inside a little ditch, the ditch is lowered down from the ground, and the tree itself is stretching, is widened, and is actually taking up place beyond the ditch, which means that part of the tree is in the ditch, and part of the tree, if you look at the tree from the top level, you can actually see the tree protruding from the ground on top of the ditch. And the question is, do we view the part of the tree that we want to use, the part that is protruding above the ground, above the higher level, do we say, since the first 3 tvachim is close to the ground, therefore it should be mutar? Or do we say no, since in the level of the ditch, which is lower down, we start counting 3 tvachim from lower down, and anything above 3 tvachim from the lower down area is an extension of a part which is above 3 tvachim relative to the lower area, and therefore it's called an extension of something which is asa, and therefore one will not be able to use even the area 3 tvachim above the ground on the upper level. So that the Gemara says that's also going to be a machlekes between Rabba and Rav Sheshes. According to Rabba, then we look at the ground at any given point. In the ditch, you have 3 tvachim off the base of the ditch. When you want to use the part of the tree that's above the higher level, then 3 tvachim off the ground is still considered as an elevated, as an extended ground, and you can use that, and only above 3 tvachim from there will be asa. Rav Sheshes will say no. Rav Sheshes will say that since anything above 3 tvachim from the lowermost point of the tree is considered an area that you're not allowed to use on Shabbos, and everything else is an extension of that area, and therefore one's not allowed to use it on Shabbos. The Chayin Bekeren, obvious, the same applies if you have a tree that's actually in a corner where you've got a wall, where you've got a corner where two walls meet, and you've got a tree wedged into that corner, which means that three sides of the tree, so to speak, one cannot see them at all. They're totally hidden from eye where the wall is, and it's only one quarter of the tree, one edge of the tree can be seen from the front. Then the same question applies. If we were to look at the tree from the three sides that are hidden by the wall, then the lowermost point of the tree that's actually discernible is the point from where the wall ends, the top of the wall. So we should have thought that from that side, if you want to use the tree, then the 3 tvachim, up to 3 tvachim above the wall, is an extension of the wall, and only from there is not allowed to be used on Shabbos. However, if you look at the tree from the side where there's no walls, there, anything from 3 tvachim off the ground is already considered as a place which you're not allowed to use on Shabbos. So again, it will be a machlokes, Rabbah and Rav Sheshes. According to Rabbah, you would be allowed to use the part of the tree 3 tvachim above, within 3 tvachim above the wall. According to Rav Sheshes, we'll say no. Since this part of this tree, the part that you can see from 3 tvachim above the ground, is already called osur, you're not allowed to use the entire height of the tree above that point. That's v'chein bekeren zovis. Says the Gemara, Hahu dikra, there was this palm tree, dehavela abaya, that belonged to Abaya, v'hava solik be'i puma. And this palm tree actually was inside the house, totally surrounded by walls, and it was protruding above the roof of the wall through a skylight. And anybody who's standing on the skylight, this tree is actually totally covered and out of sight on all 4 sides, because it's surrounded by walls. And it's just protruding above the tree, above the roof, and we would have thought that since the only part of the tree that I can see relative from standing on the roof is the part protruding from the roof, then maybe the first 3 tvachim above the roof you're allowed to use on Shabbos, and only what's beyond that you're not allowed to use. Or we can say no. Since inside the house you can see the whole tree, and 3 tvachim off the floor, off the ground, is already not allowed to be used. Only the first 3 tvachim you can use, above that not. In which case the entire tree, all the way up, should not be able to be used. And again, it would seem that it's a machlokes Rabbah and Rav Sheshes, but the Gemara is going to challenge that. So also look at Rav Yosef. They asked Rav Yosef, what's the halacha with this tree? V'sharolei, he allowed them to use the first 3 tvachim from on top of the rooftop. Omri Rav Acha bar Tachlifa. Rav Acha bar Tachlifa commented, the sharolecha k'Rabba sharolecha. The fact that you allowed them to use those first 3 tvachim, does that mean that you're ruling like Rabbah in this discussion, that we say ara smichta, and as long as it looks like it's protruding, it's an extension of any ground level or any wall or any rooftop, then that's considered, you have 3 tvachim from there. Pshita, then that's pashut. Then that means the Gemara is asking a question, what was Rav Acha bar Tachlifa commenting that Rav Yosef was following Rabbah? Of course Rav Yosef was following Rabbah. It goes without saying. You can see if he allowed them to use the tree, the first 3 tvachim above the rooftop, he must have been following Rabbah. Says the Gemara, no. There's an element of chiddush here. Ma'odetema, I may have thought, afilu Rav Sheshes, even according to Rav Sheshes, who normally says that you look at the ground, and since at the bottom of the tree, within the house, you can see the tree, and therefore you only have 3 tvachim, maybe Rav Sheshes would have agreed that in this case we consider the tree as protruding from on top of the house, and we disregard the area within the house as if it's invisible, as if you cannot see it. And if indeed you could not see it, of course Rav Sheshes would agree. Why would Rav Sheshes view this tree as being invisible, even though in the house it is visible? Because he holds basic command domi. Maybe he holds that we view the entire home as being filled up, and this is a concept we've seen previously in Maseches Eruvin, that an entire home, with a certain understanding, in certain cases we view it as if it's completely filled up. And if so, virtually speaking, we view the home as being filled, and then you don't see the tree at all. And therefore, even Rav Sheshes would agree that you get 3 tvachim above the rooftop. And then Rav Sheshes will agree that you can use the first 3 tvachim from the rooftop. Komash Malon, that's what Rav Acha bar Tachlifa was saying, that when Rav Yosef says it was mutter, it wasn't because Rav Sheshes agreed, it's indeed because he ruled like Rabbah. Continues the Gemara. Tanan, we learned in our Mishnah, Shroshav Gevoin Min Haaretz Gimel Tvachim. the roots that are above 3 tvachim off the ground, lo yeshiv aleim, you're not allowed to sit on top of these roots that are above 3 tvachim off the ground. Hey Chadomi, what case is the Mishnah talking about? If these roots that the Mishnah is talking about are roots that do not bend over, back down within 3 tvachim off the ground, pshita, what's the chiddush of the Mishnah? We know that you're not allowed to sit or use or climb on any tree when it's above 3 tvachim off the ground. Elolav, it must be talking about afal gav de hodri kipi, that it must be when the Mishnah says that the roots that are above 3 tvachim, you're not allowed to sit on them, it means even the part that bends down and is now within 3 tvachim off the ground, and nevertheless, you're not allowed to sit on it, even though it's within 3 tvachim. And the Gemara is trying to bring proof from this Mishnah, like Rav Sheshes. Rav Sheshes says that anything that's, even if it's within 3 tvachim off the ground, if it's an extension of a part of the root that's above 3 tvachim off the ground, then it's also. Says the Gemara, Loi, there's no proof from this Mishnah to Rav Sheshes. Lo'ilam de loi hodri kipi. The Mishnah is talking about a case where the root is above 3 tvachim and does not come back down to within 3 tvachim. And we asked the Kasha that if the root is above 3 tvachim, it goes without saying that it's osa. What's the chiddush of the Mishnah? Says the Gemara, the Mishnah is coming to teach us, Afel gav de tzidoy echod shove le'oretz. If this root, on one side of the tree, the earth is higher and is actually flush with this root. It's only on the other side of the tree where the earth is lower, and this root is actually protruding 3 tvachim above the ground. So I may have thought that you're allowed to sit on this root because relative to the higher part of the earth, it's less than 3 tvachim off the ground. The Mishnah is coming to tell us that no, since at this point of the root that you're sitting on, there is a 3 tvachim gap to the earth below it, you're not allowed to sit on it. Continues the Gemara. Tonu Rabbanon. We learned in the Brisa, Shrashei ilon shegvoyin min haaretz gimel tvachim. The roots of a tree that are above the ground, 3 tvachim. Oy sheyesh chalal tachtei and gimel tvachim, or roots that have a hollow, a space underneath the root, between the root and the ground. And the place can discuss exactly what this means. Afal pishet tzidoy echod shove le'oretz. Even though one side of this root is flush with the ground, and there's no airspace underneath it, it's just above the ground. Hareza lo yeshiv alen, as we saw before, he's not allowed to sit on it. Lefisha ein oilin be'ilon, because you're not allowed to go up onto a tree on Shabbos. Ve'in nitlin be'ilon, one's not allowed to be suspended from a tree on Shabbos. Ve'in nishonin be'ilon, you're not allowed to lean on a tree. Ve'lo yale be'ilon mi'b'oidyoim ve'yeshiv sham kolayim kuloi, you're not even allowed to go up onto a tree on Shabbos and sit on the top of the tree the entire Shabbos. Echod ilon, this applies also to a tree, ve'echod kol behema, or to any animal. The same applies, you're not allowed to lean on an animal, climb on an animal, ride on an animal, be on an animal on Shabbos. Avol, however, don't think that the reason you're not allowed to go up is because it's too much effort, it's more effort than we want you to do on Shabbos. No, it's nothing to do with effort. Proof being that a boyer, a pit, siach, a ditch, or ma'ora, a cave, a geder, or a fence, metapes v'oili, you're allowed to climb up them, or metapes v'ered, and climb down them, afilu hein meo amo, even if they're 100 amas high and deep, there's no issue with that. The issue with climbing up a tree is that you may break off a branch on Shabbos, and that only applies to the tree, and there's other issues regarding riding on an animal, but there's no issue with making an effort of climbing up and down anything that's not an animal or a tree. Continues the Gemara. Tani chodim, one brisa we learned in Olo, if somebody went up on top of a tree, mutar leirid, he's allowed to climb down on Shabbos. With Tani choda, in another brisa it says also leirid, if you're on top of a tree, you're not allowed to climb down on Shabbos. Now the truth is that there's an issue with climbing up a tree on Shabbos, there's an issue with climbing down a tree on Shabbos, there's an issue with being on a tree on Shabbos. So if somebody's on top of a tree, there's an issue with that, there's a problem. But climbing down is also a problem, you're not allowed to climb down a tree. But on the other hand, staying on the tree is a very much a prolonged issa. He's staying on the tree the whole Shabbos. Climbing down is also prohibited, but at least it only takes a few moments and then you're off the tree. So that's going to be a discussion. Now there seems to be a contradiction in the Brisas whether one's allowed to climb down from this tree on Shabbos. So the Gemara is going to suggest 3 answers. Number 1, Loi Kashya, Kan mi b'oidyoim, kan mi shechashecha. If you went up before Shabbos came came in, you're allowed to go down from the tree. However, if you went up the tree after Shabbos came in, we give you a penalty and we do not let you come down because you were not allowed to go up. When you went up, it was an issa on its own right. A second explanation. It could be both brises are talking about somebody who went up after it was already Shabbos. Nonetheless, it's not a contradiction. Kan b'shoigig, kan b'mezid. The brisa that says he's allowed to come down is talking about that he went up by mistake. He was not intentionally trying to break Shabbos. And the brisa that says he's not allowed to come down is referring to somebody who intentionally broke Shabbos. The third explanation says the Gemara, they're both talking about that he went up unintentionally. They're discussing, the brisa is actually arguing as to whether we give a penalty to somebody who by mistake did something wrong on Shabbos, but just in order to make sure that he wouldn't do such a thing intentionally. Marasovar Konsinon, one brisa says we do give him a penalty, a knas, even though where he went up b'shoigig, and that's the brisa that says he's not allowed to come down. Or Marasovar Lo Konsinon, the brisa that says he can come down, says that since when he went up by mistake, he can come down on Shabbos. Continues the Gemara, Omar Rav Huna Bereder Rav Yeshua. Ketanoi, it seems to be this contradiction we just saw in the brisa as to whether it's better for a person to stay on the tree, even though it's osa, just in order to avoid coming down from the tree, which is osa, or whether it's better that he should come down from the tree and not stay on the tree, seems to be following Ketanoi, the Machlokes Tanoim we're about to see. And we saw as follows. Hanitonin b'matono achas. We know there are some korbonos that the zrikas adam, the sprinkling of the blood, only gets sprinkled on one corner of the mizbeach. Shenis arvu b'nitonin b'matono achas. If you have a korban that only needs one sprinkling, that got mixed in, the blood got mixed with another korban's blood that also only needs sprinkling in one corner, yinotnu b'matono achas, you can sprinkle once on that one corner of the mizbeach, and that sprinkling will suffice for both korbanos whose bloods have got mixed up, have got mixed together. Matan daled, if a korban that needs 4 matonis, there are some korbanos that need to be sprinkled on all 4 sides of the mizbeach. The way you do that is you sprinkle on 2 opposite corners, and each time you sprinkle, the blood actually splashes on 2 walls, 2 adjacent walls. So if you have one korban whose blood that needed matan daled, needed its blood on 4 sides of the mizbeach, but matan daled that got mixed together with another korban's blood that also needs the same type of sprinkling, yinotnu b'matan daled, then you can do that sprinkling, the 4-wall sprinkling, and do that with this mixed up blood, and it will apply to both bloods. The challenge is matan arba b'matan achas. What happens if the blood of a korban that needed one sprinkling got mixed together with blood that needs to be put on 4 walls of the mizbeach? What do we do then? Do we sprinkle once? Do we sprinkle 4? It's going to be Machlokes Tanoim. Rabbi Eliezer Omer yinotnu matan daled. He says that you're allowed to and you should sprinkle on 4 sides of the mizbeach, even though the part of this blood is only supposed to be sprinkled on one corner, and adding on is Bal Tosif. We know you're not allowed to add on to the dimensions of a mitzvah. You're not allowed to sprinkle the blood of a korban that only needs 1 sprinkling with 4 sprinkling. Rabbi Eliezer says, nonetheless, you're allowed to do that, and we'll soon see why. Rabbi Yeshua Omer yinotnenu b'matono achas. Rabbi Yeshua says no. He says that since one of the korbanos are only allowed to be put with 1 matana, with 1 sprinkling on the mizbeach, and as it happens, the korban that needs 4 is b'di'eved, it's a kosher korban even if you only do 1. So he says, do 1, don't do 4. Doing 4 is going to be Bal Tosif on the dam, on the blood that only needs 1. Omar Rabbi Eliezer said to Rabbi Yeshua, Harayu over al Bal Tigra. You, Rabbi Yeshua, who say that you only sprinkle once, you're transgressing the Aveira of Bal Tigra. Bal Tigra says in the Torah, you're not allowed to minimize from the dimensions and from the way you're supposed to do a mitzvah. If the Torah says you're supposed to sprinkle 4 times, you're not allowed to do it just once. Omar Rabbi Yeshua, Harayu over Bal Tosif. Rabbi Yeshua responds to Rabbi Eliezer, you, Rabbi Eliezer, say that you should do 4. It's all very good that you're not going to be transgressing Bal Tigra on the korban that needed 4, but you're being transgressing the Bal Tosif on the korban that needed one. The blood that needs just one sprinkling and you're doing 4, there's an Aveira which says you're not allowed to add to what it says in the Torah. Omer Rebbe Eliezer. Rebbe Eliezer says, Loi Omru, when do you say that there's an Issa, there's an Aveira of Bal Tosif? Elo kashu ba'atzmoi. If you had the blood which needed just one sprinkling on its own, and you did 4, that's Bal Tosif. Here that the blood is mixed in together with blood that needs 4, you're not transgressing Bal Tosif. Omar le Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Yeshua said back to Rebbe Eliezer, for the same token, you asked against me. You asked that how can I say that I only do one sprinkle and transgressing Bal Tigra, lo nemar Bal Tigra, elo kashu ba'atzmoi. Only when the blood is on its own, the blood that needs to be sprinkled 4, and you sprinkle 1, then it's Bal Tigra. But in the case here where I've got 2 bloods together and one of them indeed only needs 1 sprinkling, there's no Bal Tigra. V'oid omer Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Yeshua says another point. Kishenosato, when you, Rebbe Eliezer, gave 4, when you did Matan Daled, where you sprinkled on 4 sides of the Mizbeach, even though there was blood mixed in here that was only supposed to be sprinkled once, Ovartu al Bal Tosif, then you transgressed Bal Tosif, v'osiso masa biodecho, you transgressed Bal Tosif by doing something, by doing an activity. Kisheloi nosato, however, when I didn't give 4, when I only did 1 sprinkling, even though part of the blood needed 4 sprinkling, or 4 sprinkling on 4 sides, when I didn't do 4, it's true that it's a Bal Tigra. I did too little. I didn't do enough sprinkling for the blood that needed more sprinkling. But the Bal Tigra I transgressed by not doing an activity. I didn't do an act. It's always easier, if you've got a choice, it's always better to let something negative happen without having to do an activity than actively doing it. So that was the end of this brisa. So says the Gemara. So what do we have now? We have a machlekes between Rebbe Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua. Rebbe Eliezer said that it's better to do a mitzvah of sprinkling 4 times, which is that korban that needed to be sprinkled on the 4 corners, then, or on the 4 walls more accurately. It's a mitzvah to sprinkle, and the mitzvah of sprinkling 4 times overrides the issa of Bal Tosif relative to the other blood. He says, do a Maisa mitzvah, it's better. Rebbe Yeshua says, no, better don't do any Maisa and let the problem just happen on its own. So says the Gemara, Rebbe Eliezer do Omar Hosam kum asay odif, according to Rebbe Eliezer, who says, better to actually do the activity of sprinkling the 4, because sprinkling 4 is of its own right a mitzvah for the korban that needed to be sprinkled on all 4 sides. So he'll say that in the case where a person is stuck at the top of a tree on Shabbos, he should come down, even though coming down itself is a problem, but the actual coming down is a positive thing. It's a mitzvah to stop being on the tree on Shabbos. It's true that the actual coming down is an issue, but once you're down, you're no longer transgressing using a tree on Shabbos. Rabbi Yeshua, however, according to Rabbi Yeshua, the Omar Hosom Sheva Al Taisa Odif, Rabbi Yeshua, who prefers to let the problem just happen by not doing anything, Hochnami lo yered, he'll say, just stay at the top of the tree. It's true you're not allowed to be at the top of the tree, but you are on top of the tree. Just stay there and do nothing, rather than coming down from the tree where that's an activity of using the tree that you shouldn't be doing. Says the Gemara, no. It could be that the Rebbe Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua that argued regarding whether one should do extra sprinkling of the blood or one should do less sprinkling of the blood is not exactly going to, it's not going to look that way regarding coming down from the tree. Dilma may be loihi, it's not that way. When did Rebbe Eliezer say over there in the case of sprinkling of the blood, kum asay odif, that it's better to do the mitzvah of sprinkling the blood, eladuk ovid mitzvah. There, when you're sprinkling on the 4 sides of the Mizbeach, you're actually doing a mitzvah because that korban needs it. You're doing the mitzvah, then the mitzvah will override the Bal Tosif for the other blood. But in this case of climbing down from the tree, mitzvah. It's true that it's virtuous to come down. We gain something by coming down, that you no longer transgress the prohibition of using a tree. However, you can't say it's a mitzvah. There's no mitzvah to come down. Hochanami lo yered. Maybe Rebbe Eliezer will agree in that case that you don't come down from the tree. V'inami, and we're going back now to Rabbi Yeshua. Ad kan lo k'omer Rabbi Yeshua hosam. Maybe Rabbi Yeshua only over there regarding sprinkling of the blood, sheva al taisa odif. Only there he said that you should not sprinkle more than once. Elo deloi ka'ovid isura. Because over there, if you sprinkle just once, I'm not actually doing an Avera with my hands. I'm just sprinkling once. And the fact that there's a Baal Tigra, the korban that needed to be sprinkled on 4 sides of the Mizbeach, is not getting enough sprinkles. Okay, I'm not doing a mitzvah. An Avera, it's happening on its own. Aval hoch, in the case of climbing down from a tree, the ka'ovid isura, in the case of Hocha in the tree, where being in the tree is actually the Ka'ovid Yisura, is continuously that he's doing an Avera, maybe in that case he should come down from the tree, that way at least he'll stop doing an Avera. So it's not similar to the case of the blood, where I'm not actually doing an Avera by sprinkling just once. Continues the Gemara. Toni Chod, in one brisa we learned, Echod ilon lach, that the prohibition of using and climbing on a tree is also on a moist tree, ve'echod ilon yovish, even on a dried out tree. V'tani idoch, in another brisa it says, B'med devarim amurim, when do we say that one's not allowed to climb and use a tree? Belach, when the tree is still moist. Aval b'yovish, when it's dried out and it's not anymore getting any nourishment from the ground, so to speak, it's a dead tree and it's considered as if it's no longer attached to the ground, mutter. You're allowed to climb on that tree, even if somebody were to break off a branch off a tree that's no longer yearning any nourishment from the ground, he will not have transgressed the issa of kaitzer. Omer Rav Yehuda lo kosher. Rav Yehuda says that these two brises, even though it looks like they're contradicting each other, they're not contradicting each other. Kan b'shegizoi machlif. Kan b'she'ein gizoi machlif. In the event that it's the trunk of the tree regenerates itself, then you're not allowed to climb up that tree on Shabbos, even though it's a dry tree. But the tree that the trunk itself is no longer regenerates itself, then the tree is totally dead, and you're allowed to climb on it on Shabbos. Asks the Gemara, I don't understand. The contradiction in the Brisa was regarding a dried out tree. Gizoi machlif yovish korisole. If this tree is regenerating itself, it's clearly not a dried out dead tree. It's still got some moisture to it, or it wouldn't be replacing itself. So that cannot be an explanation. Elo, says the Gemara, lo kashya. I'll give you a different explanation. Can be a moisachamo. When is one allowed to climb up the tree? That is when in the summertime, where everybody can see that it's totally dried out, and therefore there'll be no maras ayin. It will not look as if you're using a tree that's alive. Because in the summer one can tell very clearly which trees are alive, which ones are dead. Can be moisa geshomim. However, in the winter, in the rainy days, where it's not clear to see which tree is dried out and which one isn't, there's an issue of maras ayin. People will think that you're using a tree that's still alive, and therefore you're not allowed to go up even a dead tree, a dried out tree, in the rainy days. Asks the Gemara, be moisa chamo, going up in the summer days where you can see that it's a dried out tree, hanosra peri. At the end of the day, there are still some fruits hanging on this tree from the previous crop, and those fruits are going to become detached. People seeing that will think you're allowed to detach fruits from a tree on Shabbos, and they will come to detach fruits from a moist tree, from a live tree. Says the Gemara, you're right, but deleka peri, the brisa that says that you're allowed to go up the tree on Shabbos, and we said it's talking about in the summer days, it's talking about providing that there are no fruits on the tree. Asks the Gemara, v'hakanosri kinsi, there are twigs attached to the tree, and they will become dislodged and detached when you climb the tree, and people will see that and again get confused, and it should be asa. Says the Gemara, bigaduda. You're right, we're talking about a bare trunk where there is no twigs attached to it at all, and only that type of tree, providing it's dead, providing it's dried out, you're allowed to go up on Shabbos. Asks the Gemara, Eini, is that so? It's not so. V'Rav ikla l'apastia. Rav visited a place called Apastia, v'osar bigduda, and he said, even in the summer, even a dried out tree, even one with no fruits, and the bark, the trunk is completely bare, you're not allowed to go up in it on Shabbos. So then in which case, how are we going to explain the brisa that says you are allowed to go up on Shabbos? Which type of tree are you allowed to go up on Shabbos? Answers the Gemara that halachically speaking, you were allowed to go up such a tree. However, Rav, Bika Motza, when he came to this place called Apastia, it was a place where the people were not B'nai Torah, there were people who were lax in halachas and didn't understand halachas, and he knew if they would start climbing this tree, then they would start climbing other trees, and it would be an issue. Because they were people who didn't have the boundaries of Torah to protect them and their knowledge to know where something is permitted and where it's prohibited. And they were compared to a bika, to an open, unfenced field. So bika motza, it's as if he found an open, unprotected field, v'godar bogeder, and he made a fencing for it to protect it. The way that Rav protected these people, that they should not, chas v'shalom, climb trees that they're not allowed to climb, is he said to them, don't climb any trees, even those that one would be able to climb otherwise. So till now we've discussed climbing and using trees on Shabbos. Now we're going to discuss grass, pulling out grass on Shabbos. Omar Romi bar Abba, Omar Vasi. Also, la'odom shihalech al gabe asovim b'Shabbos. It's prohibited. One's not allowed to walk on grass on Shabbos. Mishum shenemar, since it says in the pasuk says, v'ot b'raglayim choytei. It's possible by just walking with one's feet. It's possible to do a sin. What sin is that? The sin of walking over grass, and one could unintentionally dislodge, sever, disconnect the grass from its roots, from the ground, and that is also on Shabbos. Continues the Gemara. Toni Chodim, one brayse we learned, mutalelech al gabe asovim b'Shabbos, it's permitted to walk on grass on Shabbos. V'tanya idach, in another brayse we learned, also you're not allowed to walk on grass on Shabbos. How are we going to explain this contradiction? The Gemara is going to have 5 suggestions. Loi kosher. The moist grass, which are still considered alive and considered attached to the ground, you're not allowed to walk on. The yeveshim, the dried ones, which are considered as detached, and even if somebody were to sever those grasses from the ground, it would not be a biblical isser. One's allowed to walk on them on Shabbos. V'ibay Sema, says the Gemara, second suggestion, it could be both brises are talking about moist grass. V'loi kasha, it's not a contradiction. Can be a moisa chamo, can be moisa geshomim. In the summer days, that means we're not concerned about actually detaching the grass blades. We're concerned about the seeds, the grass seeds that are within the grasses. They are going to become dislodged. And these seeds, the grass seeds, are only present, they're only there in the summer days. So in the can be moisa chamo, where there's a risk of dislodging the seeds of the grass, that's an issue. Can be moisa geshomim. However, in the rainy days where these seeds are not there, you're allowed to walk on the grass. V'iboy Sema, the Gemara says, a third suggestion. Habi moisa chamo, they're both talking about in the summer days. V'loi kasha, nonetheless, it's not a contradiction. Ha'desayim masane, when a person is wearing shoes, then there's no reason he should tear away the grass. He's allowed to walk there on Shabbos. If he's not wearing shoes, it's awesome, because the blades of grass would get stuck between his toes, and when he's walking, he will pull out the grass from the ground, and that will be awesome. Another fourth suggestion, says the Gemara, both brises are talking about that he's wearing shoes. Nonetheless, it's not a contradiction. The brisa that says you're not allowed to walk on the grass blades on Shabbos is a type of shoe that has folds, has spikes, and those spikes and folds could tear out some of the grass. However, if you're wearing shoes that there's no reason they should pull out the grass, you're allowed to walk on them on Shabbos. The fifth and last explanation in the Gemara, it could be that both brises are talking about these wearing shoes with these folds, with these spikes. The brisa that says that you're not allowed to walk on the grass is talking about where the grass blades are very long, and therefore there's a good chance they're going to get entangled and they're going to get pulled out. The brisa that says you are allowed to is talking about that the grass blades are short, and therefore you're allowed to walk on them on Shabbos. And the Gemara ends off, or idno dekaimen on Reb Shimon. Now that we rule like Reb Shimon, that a dover she'einei miskaven, doing any malacha on Shabbos, that he's doing it unintentionally, he has no need or desire to do the malacha, it's just happening in passing, that Reb Shimon says it's mutter, kulhu shori. In all the above cases, one's allowed to walk on grass, since even if the grass would get pulled out, it's not what the person intends to do, and it's mutter on Shabbos. Continues the Gemara. We mentioned the pasuk a few moments ago of Otz beraglayim choite. It's possible to do an avera by walking, by treading with one's feet. So the Gemara is going to learn something else from this pasuk. V'omar Rami bar Choma Omer of Asi. We know there's a mitzvah in the Torah called Oino. You're not allowed to deprive a husband is not allowed to deprive his wife of the mitzvah of Oino. And somebody who forces his wife to be the recipient of mitzvahs Oino, it's Asar. Shenemar, as it says, there's Navera you can do using the lower part of your body, and this is alluding to the mitzvah of Oino, which is imposed on a person's wife when she doesn't consent. Anyone who forces his wife with this mitzvah, his children will have negative character traits. Omer of Ikabar Chinana, Mikra, where do we learn this from? And it's the very same pasuk we mentioned before. This pasuk in Mishli, the pasuk actually starts with Gambeloi Das, which means without das, without desire, without consent, nefesh loy tov, then it will cause a person's spirit to be not good, and a person can sin with his legs. So from this pasuk of Gambeloi Das, nefesh loy tov, you learn that when a woman doesn't give her consent, then nefesh loy tov, the traits of the child will not be so good. Tanya Namihachi, we also learned like this in a Braisa, Gambeloi Das nefesh loy tov, this pasuk that says that in the absence of consent, there is a not good nefesh that's involved. Mitzvah is somebody who imposes this mitzvah on his wife. And the last three words of this pasuk that say that a person can sin with his feet, what's that going on? That's talking about somebody who troubles his wife. It's a tircha for somebody who does the mitzvah of oina and repeats it immediately afterwards. It's a burden for his wife, and therefore it's considered otz beraglayim choita. Asks the Gemara, Eini, you're saying that repeating the mitzvah of oina twice, one after the other, is a burden and is something which is a sin? It seems to be the opposite. Va'amar Rava. Rava says, Haroitze lasois kol bonov zechorim, somebody who wants all his offspring to be male, yiv oil v'yishne, then he should do the mitzvah of oina and repeat it straight afterwards again. So you see that it's a virtuous thing. Says the Gemara Loikasha, it's not a question, kan ledas, kan shaloi ledas. If the wife consents, of course it's a wonderful thing. If she doesn't consent, it's not. Continues the Gemara. Omer of Shmuel bar Nachmeni Omer of Yechanon, kol isha shetivas ba'alo ledvar mitzvah. Any woman that verbally asks her husband to do the mitzvahs oina with her, havi leibonim, then she deserves and merits to have children. Shafilu b'doiro shel Moshe lo hayu k'moison, that even the generation of Moshe Rabbeinu were not deserving to have children like that. De'ilu b'doiro shel Moshe ksiv. Regarding the generation of Moshe Rabbeinu, what does it say in the pasuk? The pasuk says, havu lochem, take for you anoshim chachomim, wise people, unavoinim, and understanding people, ve'yuduim l'shivteichem, known to the tribes. Uchsiv, but it says that even though they were told to find such people, who did they find in practice? V'ekach es rosh shivteichem, I'll take the heads of the tribes, anoshim chachomim, wise people, ve'yuduim, and known, ve'ilu nevoinim loy ashkach, but people who are understanding, who are nevoinim, they didn't find such people in the generation of Moshe Rabbeinu. So you see that the generation of Moshe Rabbeinu was void of people who are nevoinim. Ve'ilu gabeleo, Yaakov Avinu's wife Leah, Ksiv, it says in the pasuk, Vateitze Leah likrosoi. Leah came, it says, Vayova Yaakov min Asada, Yaakov came from the field, Bo'erev, in the evening, Vateitze Leah likrosoi. Leah came out towards him, Vatoimer, and she said to Yaakov, Elai Tovoi, I want you tonight to come to my tent. Kisocher secharticha, I've hired you, bedudoi b'ni, vayishkav ima balaylahu. So there you see clearly that Leah asked Yaakov to do the mitzvah of oina with her. Uchsiv, and it says in the pasuk, umibnei Yisachar, that she conceived Yisachar that night, and it says that the tribe of Yisachar, yoidei bino leitim, lodas ma yasa Yisrael, roshehem Mosaim v'chol achem al piem. You see that Yisachar merited even bina, yoidei bina liitim, which is understanding. So you see that in the merit that Leah actually asked her husband to be with her, she merited something that in the generation of Moshe Rabbeinu was not present. Asks the Gemara, Eini, how can you say that a woman who asks her husband for the mitzvah of Oina is a virtuous thing? V'omer Yitzchok bar Avdimi, Yitzchok bar Avdimi says that Eser klolois niskalo lo Chava, when Chava ate from the Eitz Hadas, she was cursed with 10 curses. T'chsiv, as it says in the Pasuk, as follows: Elo isha omar harbe arbe. The Pasuk goes harbe arbe itzvoinich veiroinich. What's harbe arbe? Very many, referring to challenges. Elu shnei tipei domim. These are 2 drops of blood that are a challenge for a woman. Achas dam nida. One is the blood that makes a woman tomei, called dam nida. V'achas dam basulim, and the dam of basulim. The pasuk continues. Harbe arbe itzvoinich. The etzev is a type of a depression, a difficulty. Zetzar gidel bonim. This is the pain of bringing up children. V'heiroinech, referring to the difficulty of pregnancies. Zetzar ho'ibur, that's going through the 9 months of pregnancy, which makes a woman feel ill at times. Be'etzev tildi bonim, and when you give birth, it will also be done with difficulty. Kamashmoy, it doesn't need much elaboration. A woman, when she gives birth, goes through considerable pain. The pasuk continues, you will be yearning and craving for your husband. Melamid, from there you see, when a husband goes on a journey, then she craves and yearns for her husband. That's the 7th thing mentioned so far in the pasuk, that he will control you. What does that mean? That a woman can desire and want to be with her husband and have the mitzvah of Oina only in the heart, but she will not verbally express that. He has control, so to speak, on her. He can verbalize his desire to do this mitzvah. And this happens to be a positive trait that women do not openly ask for this mitzvah. But either way, what do we see here? We see that a man is tovea bepeh, a woman is not tovea bepeh. She doesn't ask for it. So how can you say before that if a woman asks for it, she merits these amazing children? Answers the Gemara, Kika Amrinon, when do we say that a woman is allowed to, so to speak, to make her needs clear and express them? That she just acts in a pleasing way, in a way that gives him the message that she's yearning and craving for his company, but not that she verbally expresses it. That's something that's inappropriate it's immodest for a woman to do that. Okay, says the Gemara, Hani Sheva Havyon, you started before, Rabbi Yitzchok bar Avdimi said, Eser klolis niskalelo Chava, that Chava was cursed with 10 curses. The Gemara mentioned just 7 of them. K'yoser Avdimi, Omar, Rav Dimi said there's another 3. Atufa ka'evil, she's wrapped like somebody in mourning, which means she has to cover her hair. We know that married women have to cover their hair. Umanuda mikol adam, she's cut off from other people. We'll soon see exactly what that means. It either means that she's not allowed to have yichud, or it means that she's not allowed to marry a second husband. V'chavusha beveis or asurim. We know that women, they stay in the house called kvuda bas melech pnima, and the fact that she's, so to speak, confined within her home, similar to somebody in prison, that's also a type of a curse. Says the Gemara, "My menuda mikol adam." What does it mean that she is menuda? She's cut off from other people. Is it because there's an issa for her to do yichud, to be privately secluded in a room with another male, not her husband? It's equally osir for the man, not just for the woman. Here, these are klolis that apply to the woman. She's also to have 2 husbands. A husband is allowed to have 2 wives. We don't do that. Most people have the custom not to do that. It's not a discussion for now. But biblically speaking, a man is allowed to have 2 wives, but a woman is not allowed to have 2 husbands. Continues the Gemara. B'masnitaton, in a brayso we learned, what are the other 3 curses? Megadeles sar kalilis, she allows her hair to grow long like Lilis, which is the name of some evil spirit. V'yesheves umishtanes mayim kabahimo, that when she urinates, she sits like an animal does. V'nases kar lebala, she acts as a pillow, so to speak, for her husband. Her husband is on top, and she is a pillow to him. V'idach, and Rav Dimi, who didn't bring these three, he holds Hani Shevachula. These three that we just mentioned now are actually a praise for her, not a curse for her. The Omer Reb Chia says, Ma'idich this that it says in the Pasuk, Malfeinu mibahamois oretz, that Hashem is teaching us with the animals of the land, u'mi'oif hashamayim yechakmeinu, and Hashem makes us wise with observing the birds of the sky. What does that mean? Malfeinu mibahamois oretz, when it says that Hashem teaches us through the animals of the land, Zu pirda, this is a female mule, shekiras umishtanis maim, she crouches down when she urinates. And this is teaching us modesty. That when Hashem teaches us or He makes us wise with the birds of the sky, this is the chicken, that before it mates, it appeases its mate. Rabbi Yochanan says, even had the Torah not been given, we would learn modesty from a michatul, from a cat. It doesn't deficiate, when it passes its bowels, and it doesn't do it in public. V'gezel menamola, we learn from ants not to steal, because they never steal anything from each other. Va'aroyos, and adultery miyoina, we learn from the yoina to stay away from a dove will never mate with another dove's mate. V'derech eretz mitarnugel, we learn appropriate conduct from the rooster. Shemafayis, it appeases its mate. V'achar kach boil, and only after that they mate. Umay mefayis lo, how does the rooster appease its the wife, so to speak? Omer Rav Yehuda, Omer Rav, hochiko omaro, this is what the male chicken says to the female chicken. This is what the cock says to the rooster. I'm going to buy you a coat that goes right down to your feet. It does this by spreading out its wings. But after they've mated, Omar Loi says to her, may the crest on the head of this cock, referring to itself, be cut off, if I can afford to buy you such a coat and I don't, which means I really, really want to, but unfortunately I can't afford it. And that's how he appeases her. He tells her before they mate how much he wants to be there for her and give her everything that she wants and needs. In Mirz Hashem, in the next shir, we're going to continue the next Mishnah.